Good evening to everyone, and welcome to another edition of Distilling Books with Socrates, where we chat with educators about books and research that can be used to inform professional practice. On today's episode, we're joined by Elizabeth Martin, the joyful questioner at Socrates Head of School and the Dean of Teaching and Learning at Allen Academy in Bryan, Texas. How are you tonight, Elizabeth?
I'm doing well. How are you, Claire?
I'm good. I'm excited to chat with you about books.
Me too.
We're so excited to learn more about Adam Grant's give and take and how we might be able to take and apply your ideas and his ideas to our work as educators and some of the key takeaways you gleaned as a result of your distillation. Okay, let's jump right in. Are you ready?
I am. I've got my book right here, ready to go.
Here we go. Question 1. So the book classifies people as either givers, takers, or matchers. Even though that might sound fairly obvious, how does Adam Grant define these terms?
Great. Yeah. So let's start with takers. So these are people who approach interactions with, what can you do for me? So they think that the world is competitive and dog eat dog, and they feel the need to self-promote. And they may have once been a giver, but just got burned too many times. So those are our takers. And then we have our givers who approach interactions as, what can I do for you? They are really giving with their time and ideas and connections and resources. And unfortunately, in the workplace, they're more rare. So we're all obviously very giving in our personal relationships, but sometimes in the workplace, people are different and they might have a primary style that's different. So givers aren't always the most common primary style in the workplace. And then you have your matchers, and this is the most straightforward. They care deeply about fairness, tit for tat. Like they're just like, can you relate to that, Claire? You see, like I'm a middle child, so I could also like there's a strong matcher in me. Like, we want things to be fair. So those are the three categories. And then I want to turn the question back on you, since we're the Socrates Head of School, and ask you, in the workplace, this is in like across different careers, who do you think is the most successful in the workplace of givers, takers, and matchers? And who do you think is the least successful?
Okay, let's start with the least. I would say takers are the least successful. And I would say that givers have the potential to be the most successful. And matchers, it depends on their environment and those that they're around.
Okay, that's actually a pretty solid prediction. It's a little, unfortunately, idealistic in that takers are not at the bottom. Unfortunately, the least successful are the givers, which is bad news, right? Because we're hoping that they'll be rewarded, but they're also the most likely to be the most successful too. So they're at both ends of the spectrum. So if they don't take care of themselves and they're just doormats, then they're not successful. They help others, but they don't help themselves. But if they help others and are also looking out for themselves, then they can be the most successful. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but
yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth. And before we keep digging deeper, we just want to remind everyone to click on like and subscribe below to keep up to date on our latest videos and content from SchoolRubric and leading voices in education like Elizabeth from around the world. Okay, let's jump into number 2. If we know that givers are the ones that help organizations succeed by bettering others, this seems like it should be a fairly important piece to integrate within recruitment, hiring, and the evaluation process. What are some practical ideas that leaders, all the way from coordinators to principals to even a superintendent, can help capture this concept in their organizational practice?
Yes, so one of the most important things they can do is weed out takers. So generally, if you have a culture, matchers are the majority of people, they're going to kind of go either way based on the culture. But if you have a taker in the mix, it shuts down giving across the board. So what a lot of people would think you do is like, oh, well, let's just search for givers. But hiring one giver isn't going to dramatically change your organization if there's not a culture of giving there. But if you hire a taker, they're going to shut down the giving everywhere. So it's really important to weed out the takers and also make sure that you're protecting your givers so that they're encouraged to keep giving and not feel too vulnerable to do that. Another thing that you can do is Adam Grant, they have a quiz that you can take. So it can also be professional development or maybe part of your hiring process of letting people know early on too, we value giving. And so that that evaluation could be really helpful. Adam Grant's awesome organizational psychologist. So he even has a whole section of his book of how to implement these things. So there's a whole section of the book on that. One of my favorite activities that he has is something called a reciprocity ring, which is a professional development activity you can do to try to bring giving and create an environment of giving in your organization. So he has lots of practical tips in his book as well.
I love that. My principal actually talks a lot about reciprocity in relationships and the give and take of that. And so I'm interested to learn more of that. I think too, putting that at the forefront of your interview practice of, we are a culture of givers and this is what that means is so vitally important. But once they're in the organization, they're there. And so how do you turn maybe a taker into a giver, and how do you help develop that or those qualities in them? So that's
yeah, and there's hope for takers. They can become givers again.
We are all takers at some point,
Yes. Yeah, and we mix styles, and then and we've all been in different cultures. And like I just recently retook the quiz, and in some of the scenarios, it's like, oh, I know what a giver would do, but I'm not sure I would have done. Like, we're human, and so I do think just putting an emphasis on it can really help people. Okay, let's bring back a culture of giving. So that's a great point.
Well, too, when you think about the strengths that people have, and specifically like strengths finders and how they refer to balconies and basements of strengths, sometimes you may be working in your basement of your strength and you may be being a taker in that moment, or the opposite. So it's an interesting concept and something that you can definitely dig deeper by taking those quizzes or being more intentional with those qualities. So let's move on to the next question. One of the quotes in the book that really stood out to me is, the thing about credit is that it's not zero sum. There's room for everybody, and you'll shine if other people are shining. I find that really interesting since we live in a very me first, me centric world these days, particularly with social media. So what is your reaction to this quote?
I think contribution is so much more meaningful and life-giving than competition. And so if you're in an environment where it's not, okay, if you succeed, that means there's less for me. That's such a toxic and draining environment. Whereas if you can be in an environment where you're seeing your colleagues succeed and you can be excited about that because it means there's better teaching for kids. I just think that's so much more life-giving. And I've been so lucky to have givers as mentors throughout my entire career and have learned that from them. Because you can have, I've been in competitive environments where there's like a star teacher and people are competing, and it's just, there's no need for that. There's not, it's like he says, it's not zero sum. Like there's plenty for everyone to go around, and it's just so much more exciting to be a part of something where we're all moving in the same direction and happy for each other. I would just much rather be a part of that kind of culture.
I think too, like there's nothing wrong with competition when you're all working towards the same goal and, reminding one another, we're all on the same team. We're all in this together. Sometimes we succeed because of someone else's accomplishment or someone else's strength or ability to do something. And so being able to identify that with the people that you work with and understand why they do what they do or when they are in their best can help just cultivate that culture. When I watched Adam Grant's TED Talk on the same topic, and in addition to talking about givers and takers, he also speaks about being agreeable versus disagreeable and using a 2x table to categorize this. What are the big takeaways from these 4 possible combinations?
I love this TED Talk and this comparison, because the tricky thing is, I said, weed out takers. You don't know. You can't know by interviewing someone whether or not they're a giver and a taker, because this is an intrinsic thing. You don't know if people are motivated by helping others or if they're going into an interactions thinking, what can I get out of this? Now, we do know if people are agreeable or disagreeable. It's like that is very obvious. So he has a grid. And so the agreeable givers are very easy to spot because they're going to say yes to everything and want to help everyone and be very agreeable and, giving with their time. And the disagreeable takers are easy to spot because they're monsters, right? So they're obvious. The other two are a little bit more difficult. So then you have agreeable takers. Okay. And these are who Adam Grant calls the fakers, because these are the people who are going to be nice to your face, but then are looking out for themselves and maybe stab you in the back. And then he says the most undervalued in workforce are disagreeable givers. Mm-hmm. And they're really interesting because they'll offer you critical feedback that your organization needs to improve, but they are givers at heart. So they might be gruff and they might have complaints, but they want what's best for the organization and for everyone else.
Delivery maybe not best, but the content of of what they're saying is good.
Right. And I just thought that was so fascinating. Of like, okay, how do you present and project, but then what's your intrinsic motivation?
So as a leader, either a leader of a school or a district, or even just a teacher leader on campus, how can you identify that? If it's hard to, if those people, or when they're in that moment, it's hard to identify, what are some tips and tricks on that?
That's the question, Claire. That's like, you figure that out. You got to tell everyone. Okay. And so Adam Grant has a podcast too. Like, I've been following stuff since he's written this book, because I think that's been work that he's been trying to do too, of like, okay, now we know this based on research, but how on earth do we implement this? How do we weed out the takers? How do we make givers feel safe? Like that's the $1 million question, Claire. Okay.
Well, let's go on to another one that I know in the book, Adam Grant uses a lot of stories and anecdotes to illustrate his point. But I'm wondering if you have some examples from your work as Dean of Teaching and Learning that illustrate some of the things you've picked up from the book.
So I see this play out in my daily teaching life and working with colleagues. So one example that comes to mind is a few years ago, a group of 5 colleagues, we were trying to create more meaningful feedback for students. So how can teachers spend so much time giving comments with report cards? How can we make this more meaningful and revamp that process? And there were 5 people in the room, 4 colleagues and our immediate boss. And one of the colleagues was new and a taker. And we didn't get anything done the entire meeting because it was just the taker trying to prove himself in front of the boss. So once those 2 people were out of the room and there were only 3 of us who just genuinely wanted to build something better for students and weren't trying to get credit and didn't care who got credit for what, we were able to build a much better system, but it took getting the taker who was trying to perform in front of the boss out of the room. Mm-hmm. And so I think that plays out so often of you have to have a group of people where they feel safe, where they can actually say what they think and where they're not trying to self-promote or prove themselves constantly, and where we can actually collaborate. And so I've just see that firsthand all the time of, okay, how can we create these environments and where real collaboration can take place?
I think as you were speaking, I was thinking of losing the mission of the school. Like, those takers can be kind of so me focused, and they lose, the big picture, the big mission that we're all trying to work towards.
Yes. And it'd be better to just not have a person there, to have fewer people and share more of the work than to have someone who's sucking the life out of the room. And I think everyone's experienced that.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the possibility of overgiving. Teachers and educators are sometimes so overwhelmed and overworked, particularly with everything that's been going on in the world these days. How are we supposed to ask these teachers to be givers if we run the risk of burnout, stress, and fatigue? How can we adopt a giving mindset with the right balance? And how can we be mindful of this as leaders?
I can see teachers being like, don't talk to me about giving, especially in school year. Like,
Yeah.
and I want to have a disclaimer too, because in the book, Adam Grant has a chapter just about a teacher who's experiencing burnout. And the solution to her burnout is actually more giving, just giving in different ways but I'm like, oh, whoa, let's be careful with that, because there is like we talked about at the beginning, givers being both at the bottom of the success ladder and at the top. If teachers stop taking care of themselves and just give selflessly all the time, that's not sustainable. And they're going to have burnout. And so I do think that there is a culture of martyrdom that can exist in schools where like teachers are comparing who's suffering more. And it's like, wait a minute. No, like we want to be whole, healthy people in front of kids too. Right. And so, yes, I do think like this book is.
Okay. I think I lost Elizabeth. Our last question was, I wanted to know why joyful questioner as Socrates Head of School, but it looks like we are going to have to come back to that. Is she there? There she is. You're back.
So sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm still here. I didn't know if it was me or you. Okay, so we were saying the givers have to find that balance. They have to find that middle ground. They can't just give all the time. They have to take care of themselves. So I definitely think that's something just individuals need to keep in mind, but then also as a leader, you have to know that about your givers and helping them kind of find that middle, because we all have a different way of filling our own bucket. So knowing your people is important. Okay, I have one final question, Elizabeth, and I have to ask, why joyful in your role as joyful questioner at Socrates Head of School?
Yeah, I was nervous. I was like, oh no, people are going to expect me to be happy 24/7. I choose this title. But I actually chose it because of Carol Dweck's mindset, the book Mindset, and the idea of growth mindset. Because when I was first starting as a new baby teacher, questions were really scary for me. I felt like I had to know all of the answers. If a student asked anything, I had to be the authority on it. And so I was almost like wary of questions. And so now, embracing growth mindset, I find questions exciting and following curiosity. And when students ask me something I don't know, that's exciting, and we can go explore together. And it's a joyful thing, where it used to be something that was intimidating. Now for me, it's a joyful experience. So
I love that perspective. Thank you for sharing. Elizabeth, it's been an amazing conversation, and I'm sure many people will be interested in learning more. Where can they go to find more information about your distillation of give and take?
Great. Yes. Please visit Socrates Head of School. And so we have gone through and read the book for you, because we know teachers, you don't have time. And so we've read it and then distilled it down to questions that we would love for education leaders and teachers to ask about the book, and quotes and high points, so you can get a sense of whether it's something that you want to read, or you can implement aspects of it in your classroom tomorrow, just looking at the distillation.
Okay. Elizabeth, thank you. Again, you can reach Socrates Head of School at Twitter at SOC, S-O-C, Head of School, or on their website at www.socratesheadofschool.com. Thank you for tuning in, and remember to hit that subscribe and like button for more great content from all of us at SchoolRubric. Have a great night, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching School Rubric's Educators Without Borders. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we highlight voices and perspectives of educational leaders across the globe. To stay in the know with our latest upcoming panels, interviews, tutorials, and more, make sure that you follow us on social media or visit us at SchoolRubric.com. Thank you.